You are in my heart. There is no other who knows you. Only your son, Nafa Khapera Riya Wiya Nareya, whom you have taught your ways and your might. Those on earth come from your hand as you made them. When you have dawned, they live. When you set, they die. You yourself are a lifetime. One lives by you.
In the latter half of the 14th century BCE, an enigmatic figure ascended to the throne of Egypt. This man's 17-year-long reign would be remembered for his repeated subversion of tradition. His attempt at radically changing the religious practices of ancient Egypt would lead to his successors doing everything in their power to discredit his rule, referring to him as the enemy and that criminal in archival records, and even attempting to destroy all physical traces of his time in power. So, who was this subversive figure, and how did his reign differ from those of traditional pharaohs? Quick note on pronunciation. Throughout this video, I'm going to be mostly using Egyptological pronunciation, because those are more familiar to most people. But because I enjoy the study of ancient Egyptian, I'm also going to be presenting Medio-Late Egyptian pronunciations reconstructed by linguists wherever possible. I have another script in the works explaining why these different pronunciations exist, which I'll add a link to here once it's become a video. Without further ado, let's get back into our topic. Amenhotep or Amenhotep IV, the 18th dynasty pharaoh who ruled the kingdom of Kemma, or Egypt, for a period of about 17 years between 1353 and 1334 BCE, began distorting tradition from early in his reign. By the time he took the throne, Amarna, or Amen, god of mysteries and the wind, had long since become the chief deity of the Egyptian pantheon, and the primary god pharaohs would seek to evoke. The name Amenhotep itself, meaning Amen is satisfied, serves as an example of this evocation. With the great popularity of Amen, priests of the god held a considerable amount of power in Egyptian society. In the early reign of Amenhotep IV, however, the pharaoh took up the title of Prophet of Riya Khara Ikhati, or Ra-Horachti, Ra-Horus of the Two Horizons, evoking the god of the sun alongside the invocation of Amen found in his name. This exaltation of the sun deity serves as a prelude to the increasingly distinct religious movement which Amenhotep IV followed, while his reference to himself as prophet could be seen to reflect his later depictions of himself as less of a living god and more of a priest to a far greater entity. Amenhotep IV took up an unusual approach to the worship of the sun god. Traditionally, this god was known as Riya, or Ra, and frequently depicted with the body of a man and the head of a falcon, and bearing the solar disk over his head as a sort of crown. Amenhotep IV, however, focused on a single aspect of Ra, the solar disk or Aten, called the Yatai in the Egyptian language of the time. Only a few years into his reign, Amenhotep IV began introducing a religious system entirely revolving around the sun disk Aten as a primary deity, supplanting the traditional depictions of Ra. It was during this same time that he began going by the name most know him by, Akhenaten, or Ukhenayatai in the Egyptian of the time, meaning effective for the Aten. The major focus on a single deity heavily contrasts with earlier traditions, which, despite placing certain gods above others, still recognized a multitude of gods as major parts of their religion. Akhenaten went beyond simply putting a new god at the top of the pantheon. He made attempts to completely erase the worship of Amen, and later all gods but Aten. Around the same time he changed his name, Akhenaten began closing down temples to Amen across Egypt, even forcing the god's name to be erased from certain inscriptions. Further into his reign, Akhenaten even went so far as to order inscriptions referring to gods to be altered to refer to a singular god. With the elevation of the Aten to the status of sole god, the sun disk also took on new attributes. Aten was credited with creating life, as well as cultivating its continuation through its warmth and light, allowing for the growth of plants and so on. In depictions of the Aten, its sunbeams were commonly shown to end in hands, often gripping anahu, or ankhs, the Egyptian symbol of life, signifying this life-giving association. In contrast to traditional Egyptian religion, where most important concepts, processes, and natural life cycles had their own associated gods, within Atenism, everything stemmed from the Aten. We can see in this certain parallels to the all-encompassing deity of the Abrahamic faiths, and some people have proposed that Atenist philosophy influenced the development of Judaism. However, there isn't a lot going for this hypothesis. The dates don't quite line up, and the connections are fairly superficial, so the idea is generally more popular in pop history than scholarly literature. It's most likely that the similarities can just be attributed to common characteristics of monotheism, with Atenism being noteworthy not for any influence on later monotheistic ideas, but for being one of the first monotheistic faiths we have on record. In addition to new beliefs, Atenism brought new practices. where traditionally Egyptian temples became darker and more enclosed the deeper you went within their walls, closer to the place where the statue of the god associated with that temple was kept. Temples to Aten functioned the opposite way, funneling worshippers through more enclosed entrances into wide open courtyards. With the nature of the Aten as the physical sun rather than a humanoid personification of its characteristics, such a courtyard would allow worshippers to appreciate not only a statue to the god, but the physical god itself, shining down on them with life-giving rays. In addition to the religious upheaval he brought about, Akhenaten pushed forth a dramatic shift in political traditions. Since the beginning of the 18th dynasty, the capital of Egypt had been the city of Waset, or Thebes. The city had also served as the center of worship for Amen, and was the city from which the founders of the dynasty had hailed. Long before the birth of Akhenaten, 18th dynasty conquests had brought great riches into Egypt. Much of this wealth was given as offerings to the gods, and as a result, the temples at which these offerings were made grew significantly in wealth and power. It was during this time that the Temple of Amen in Thebes reached an unprecedented level of power, surpassing even the military aristocracy. Akhenaten's religious revolution came as a personal threat to the influence of the priesthood, and this threat would only be amplified as his reign went on. Akhenaten reduced the power of the temples at every given opportunity. Around the 5th year of his reign, he declared a new capital for Egypt, tearing power from the seat of Amen worship. While Egypt's capital had changed many times in the nation's long history, Akhenaten not only moved the capital, but founded an entire city to dually serve as the capital of Egypt and a center of worship for the Aten. He named this city Akhenaten, or Akhetaten, meaning horizon of the Aten. Today the site is called Amarna. Akhenaten further defied tradition in his subversion of typical artistic conventions. The period of Egyptian rule from Akhnaten, referred to as the Amarna Period after the modern name of the site, marks a distinctive shift in Egyptian artwork as a whole. In addition to a common focus on the Aten in place of other divine figures, Amarna Period artwork is characterized by a sense of activity. Figures in motion and crowded scenes full of overlapping figures became more common. The artwork of this period is often characterized as more realistic than traditional Egyptian artwork, and while this isn't really true, with people still being heavily stylized, the stylization can be described as more naturalistic, with more curved lines and less rigid figures. Instead of representing people with the body types the ancient Egyptians perceived as ideal, muscular for men, thin for women, figures during this period were depicted with less muscular bodies, wider hips, and larger stomachs, as well as slightly different proportions in their facial structures, and longer necks. While past Egyptian artwork had typically depicted men and women with different skin tones, dark red-brown for men, tannish yellow for women, artists of the Amarna period depicted men and women alike in the same red-brown tone. Interestingly, Akhenaten's immediate family was depicted in a manner which, despite being more stylized, still did not represent the ideal Egyptian body type. Akhenaten himself is depicted with wide hips, thick lips, thin limbs, a sloping, oddly shaped head, and a protruding stomach, a major departure from the traditionally muscular representations of Egyptian kings. Similarly, depictions of Akhenaten defy the traditional portrayal of the pharaoh as a divine being. Rather than being depicted as a god on earth, Akhenaten had himself portrayed in a very human light. In addition to the aforementioned imperfections of his appearance, the pharaoh is also shown as a family man, with certain reliefs showing him simply sitting down alongside his wife and their children. Such casual scenes seem exceedingly unusual when compared to the impersonal style in which other pharaohs were typically depicted. Akhenaten was zealously devoted to his new religion. This devotion correlates to a number of the oddities of his rule, from his alteration of political traditions to his subversion of artistic ones. While Atenism would remain the state religion through 2 short reigns after his, or possibly just one reign of a person who changed their name, that period of Egyptian history is a bit fuzzy. It wouldn't take very long for the old order to reassert itself. Akhenaten's son, Akhenaten, or Ukhenayatai, living image of Aten, would renounce Atenism, returning to the supremacy of Amen, and changing his name to Akhenaten, or Tutankhamen, living image of Amen, to reflect his return to Amen worship. Tutankhamen would further go on to restore Thebes' position as capital of Egypt. Later rulers would further seek to eliminate Akhenaten from history. In addition to referencing him by unflattering epithets, many of the former pharaoh's construction projects, built from small blocks known today as talatat, would be torn down, with the blocks being entombed within the walls of later projects. Ironically, this reuse of the talatat would help to preserve them, and with them, archaeological record of Akhenaten's reign. It would seem then that we can credit a fair amount of our knowledge about this unusual figure to the very people who tried to erase him from history. But, you know, those talatat would have been completely useless to us if we couldn't read the hieroglyphs written on them, which for a long time, nobody could. If you want to learn more about how we figured out how to read hieroglyphs after the knowledge had been lost for over 1,000 years, check out my series on their decipherment, linked on screen now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I've been Soma, and I'll see you next time.